Hello, it's Tuesday, March 31st, 2020, and this afternoon I want to remember two of my uncles. I had a lot of aunts and uncles, especially on my mother's side, because she had so many brothers and sisters. But I want to remember that I had two uncles who were gay. One was my father's brother, and one was my mother's brother. I remember my uncle Didi, that was his name. Uh, I think his real name was Lambert, but they called him Didi. He was my father's younger brother, I think. And he was a nice enough man, I remember. I think he worked for the city of Chicago for most of his life. He was a civil servant, I think. And he lived with my maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Swanson, Grandma Clayton, who was not a very nice woman, as I recall. I don't think she liked kids. Um, we used to go to her home where she lived with my Uncle Didi in Roseland on the south side of Chicago. And I know my older brothers have memories of when we would visit there, if especially if my Uncle Didi was at work, they would sneak into his room and they would steal things from him, like lighters and I don't know, he had collections of things, I guess, so that's a memory I recall. He was also diabetic, and he used to have dietetic cookies in the refrigerator, and I remember as kids we would sample them, and they were pretty nasty tasting and all. I was very small. I really don't remember this, but I remember hearing stories that way back as early as the 1950s or 60s, I think he would go to family gatherings with his boyfriend at the time, who I think he had a penchant for dating sailors from the Calumet Harbor, but I don't know. I think my older brother Pat would know about that better than I. Anyway, so that's memories that I have of my Uncle Didi. The other gay uncle that I had, I never met him. He died when I was only 3 or 4 years old, and I don't remember him. His name was Chuck, Uncle Chuck. I do have a couple of photographs of him. There's a wonderful, wonderful photo of him and my mom walking on a snow-covered State Street in Chicago, and the year I think was 1934. They're dressed in really nice winter clothes. It might have been around Christmas time. And you can see in the background the marquee of one of the State Street movie palaces from back in the day. I don't know if it's still there any longer. And who it was a Hollywood movie starring Irene Dunn. You can see her name on the marquee and all. It's a wonderful photograph, and I'm so glad that I have a digitized version of it, because I remember when I came out to my mom in the middle 1970s in Texas, when I met my first boyfriend in at university, and just like what was his name, the guy from Psycho, Norman Bates, when he said a boy's best friend is his mother. Well, that was true for me too. So I shared everything with my mom. So when I met my boyfriend, I came home one weekend from school, and I was excited to tell her about it and all. And so I came out to my mom in that conversation and all. And I remember in that conversation, my mother very empathetically telling me about her brother, my Uncle Chuck, and how she used to go to gay bars with him in Chicago during Prohibition. I think my mom was a bit of a party girl before she got married. And Oh, I remember the stories she told me were wonderful. How they would go to speakeasies, when because the sale of alcohol was illegal, and she was just a very young teenager. She would go not for the drinking, but for the dancing, and they would have to knock on on the door of the tavern, and there was a sliding little window. The bouncer would see who it was to make sure it wasn't the police or anything. And those are great stories, and they're absolutely true. And and I think my Uncle Chuck brought his younger sister along as a beard. So it was. I love those stories, and I'm so grateful to my mom for sharing those with me, and I wanted to share them with you. So be fabulous.